Hi, and welcome to Random Walks HR with me, Tim Peffers, and today we are talking about football, or, for American viewers, football! Sometimes you just need to learn the right words for things. Anyway, let's not start any transatlantic fights. Today, I need your help because, as I mentioned last week, I am about to embark on my master thesis project, and I would like to do something that is useful for the world of people analytics, and I would like your feedback because I think I have a few ideas, but I want to check A, do you think they would be useful, and B, am I crazy? So what are we talking about today? Well, last week we talked about productivity, talked about getting all these different HR metrics together and then computing some calculation for productivity. Today is very much the counter to that, because actually what's the point in doing that if all our data is rubbish? Now obviously our data isn't rubbish, the data is what it is. I guess my big reflection on working people analytics for about 10 years is that the data doesn't actually say what it actually says or means sometimes. What am I talking about? Okay, engagement scores, right? We do engagement surveys, people tell us whether they want to stay at the company, whether they want to recommend the company, blah 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 blah, and we analyse this data for global organisations and we report it as is, right? The problem is, the things that actually drive engagement and the things that impact engagement are known to us, but we kind of ignore them, right? We know that there are different cultural differences in different countries around the world. People are more likely to recommend or not recommend things. There's some cultures where people will say what you want to hear. So there's different cultural biases. There's also a thing called the honeymoon period, right? When people join a new organisation, they've left their organisation for some reason, they've found something new, they're all excited, they have this honeymoon period, they're super engaged and feel super great, and that lasts 3, 6, 9, at most 12 months, and then the hedonic treadmill kicks in and things kind of go back to a more normal engagement score, right? But we know about these honeymooners, but we don't count for them when we report on our engagement scores. The same with roles, right? Often managers are highly engaged. But actually, do we kind of count how many managers are in different teams, how many honeymooners are in different teams, what proportion of a team are in those countries where there's super high engagement scores? No, we just say what it is, and we hope that the business can figure it out, right? So, what do we do about this? Well, I did promise we would talk a little bit about football, but we'll keep it short. So, football has a certain amount of randomness to it, right? Sometimes your team plays really well and has loads of chances, but they don't win. Sometimes your team has one shot on goal and actually they score two because they got lucky with that one shot and they got an own goal, right? A much more reliable way of looking at long-term team performance and long-term success is using what's called the expected goals approach, right? So rather than looking at did the ball go into the goal, you look at where was the shot taken. And what's happened is very smart people have calculated using tens of thousands of shots and where those shots were taken. They built very reliable models to predict from that position that the shot was taken what's the probability that a goal would have been scored, and that's a much more reliable metric for long-term performance, taking away a little bit of that luck, because almost everyone expected goals versus goals kind of normalizes, right? Most players just over long-term score the amount of expected goals they were expected of them. There's a few superstars who overperformed that, but let's talk about that later. There's also expected assists. So we've worked out what's the probability of a goal being scored for any position. The person who passes the ball to that person, that pass is independent, or should be independent, of whether the striker, the person who's shooting at the goal, scores, right? So a much better idea of how good you are at passing is expected assist. Did you get the ball to that person in that position, and what's the probability of them scoring the goal? Much more reliable to determine the value of one player versus independent of the striker or the goalkeeper or the other things that they can't control. So, how does this apply to HR? Well, I think we could be a lot more effective if we start putting a little X in front of some of our metrics, right? We talked about engagement. What's your expected engagement if you are a honeymooner in this kind of culture, this kind of country, in this kind of role, right? Much more interesting to understand rather than, My team has an engagement score of 70%, which sounds great, but we don't really know. But actually, if they've got a whole load of honeymooners, actually the expected engagement score could be 80. So we start the question, okay, well, what's happening? Could we be doing better onboarding? Same as you might have a team that's got an engagement score of 50, but actually if their expected engagement score is 32, actually we see that manager is doing very well despite the challenges that they have, right? Same with collaboration. O&A, Microsoft Teams, metadata, Viva, everyone very excited. But actually the real successes from that tool come from looking at behaviours of senior leaders. Why? Because senior leaders are supposed to basically just collaborate, right? They're not supposed to sit there and do things in spreadsheets or create things or have focus time. What would be really great and would move O&A and collaboration data forward is us being able to understand, okay, if you are in this type of role, like a data scientist, what does a good amount of collaboration look like? And then we can scale that to all the other areas of the business, right? You're an HR business partner, expected might be 33 hours of collaboration per week. Data scientists, it might be 12. And then we might understand, okay, well, if we have a data scientist and an HR business partner who are both doing 20 hours of collaboration, then we know that one is probably over collaborating, one is under collaborating, right? Same with turnover, same with spans and control. Spans and control, what type of work are they doing, who are they managing, what's their seniority, blah 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 blah. So if we can start to understand expectations based on very simple things such as, are they a manager, what's their tenure, where are they culturally in terms of the globe, potentially demographics as well, like age, then we might have a better understanding of whether your turnover is good or your turnover is a problem. So, to recap, why are we doing this? Why bother? I'm doing a master's, I'm looking to do something that I feel is important, but I also feel it needs to be done right. So, how do we do it? I don't know. That's what I'm going to work on. Two ideas. One, we could go the heavy data science route and pull all that engagement data and all that collaboration data into a predictive model. We can predict everyone's at an individual level, give it all the different factors and look at shared values, all this kind of stuff. We could do clustering and then we could do bagging to look at the different roles. Could do that. We then have problems with explainability, we have problems about scalability as well, right? You can't really take that approach if you've got an engagement survey where only 200 out of your 250 employees have filled it in, right? It probably won't work. The other option is less impressive, but you could just look at, okay, what are the 4 or 5 biggest factors that influence these things? Engagement, it could be tenure, it could be seniority, it could be line manager responsibility, it could be location that you work in, right? And if we could say, okay, those 4 factors explain 85, 90, 95% of someone's engagement score or collaboration score, whatever it is we're trying to measure, we can say, right, we'll control for those 4 things, we can predict on those 4 things, those kind of different categories, and then we have a generic expected engagement score, collaboration score based on that demographic. Bit simpler, bit easier to explain, maybe a bit easier to get that buy-in, right? So this is what I will explore, but again, would love to hear your thoughts and feedback around what you think is the best way to be done, but also the best way to get buy-in. So to recap, the idea would be developing a framework rather than necessarily analysing this for one organisation, for one data set, but how can we do this at scale? What can and should we control for? Then how do we build in that process to calculate expected whatever it is? That also allows us to get buy-in so that we're having conversations around the variance or the insights rather than necessarily constantly having to explain the model and what's coming out of it. And also how to use the metric. How to use a metric is obviously going to involve lots of ethical considerations. Should we do it? Should we change people's scores, engagement scores, just because where they're based on? Should we be valuing a highly engaged employee or team in Western Europe higher than a team that's highly engaged in South America or Southeast Asia? But also, can we do it? I mentioned generations and age a little while ago. Yes, that might be useful for expected voluntary turnover because younger employees are more likely to move around at a faster pace than older employees. But I mean, should we also be looking at things like gender? You look at surveys like the World Happiness Index, females are consistently scoring lower. But if we create expectations around gender, aren't we just ignoring the gender gap and normalising it and making it acceptable? So I would argue we can't do this, but these are things that we need to explore so that the approach is scalable and ethical. And how should we use it? So this is really interesting. If we go back to the football piece, most players score around their expected goals. Over a long period of time, given enough chances, they'll usually score around what their expected goals are, apart from really top class players who tend to overperform a little bit, right? So not that useful really. If you want to score more goals, you could either do two things. One is buy one of the very few players in the world, but that's going to cost you a lot of money. Or what you can do is you can change the way you attack change your strategy, not to buy the most expensive players, the players who are scoring a lot at the moment, is to get the ball into the best positions, because actually the player is not important, it's the chance creation, right? So we think back to expected, say, engagement or expected collaboration. Should we use the metric to engage individual gaps or individual problems, or should we look at it as in terms of, well, this is the expected engagement of a manager, this is the expected engagement of, or expected collaboration of a manager. If we're seeing that managers are expected to collaborate 15 hours more than individual contributors, should we take action on that? Should the goal be to actually change the expectations, change the culture, maybe give managers training in terms of agile working ways of working? Would that be the way that we need to use the metric? So, I think it's a super interesting idea. Would love to hear if anyone's actually tried this before. I'd also love to hear from people who are in the employee listening, engagement survey world, to understand, will this be useful to them, or even people who are HR leaders who would be the ones who would have to sponsor it and actually act on the outcomes, right? So, super interested in your feedback. Please reach out to me through LinkedIn. If not, please put it in the comments, and I would love to, even just if you don't have time to write to me, let's have a 5-10 minute conversation where we can just bounce ideas off each other and connect. Anyway, that's my time. Thank you for watching this far, and I hope that this wasn't a complete waste of your time.